Well, thank you for joining us with another week of our podcast from the Wonderful Day in the Lord. As we're reading through the Bible together, we're shifting back and forth right now between Job and Psalms. And we're going to go back to Psalm today, Psalm 32. This is one of the classic Psalms concerning sin and forgiveness and all that's involved with that. This Psalm, most people believe, was written in the context and in the framework of when David sinned with Bathsheba. Psalm 38 and Psalm 51 are also in that genre. But we're looking at Psalm 32 today. We're going to start with verse 3, and where David is apparently in this year period of time between his sin with Bathsheba and his confession of his sin when Nathan the prophet came to him. David is trying to justify his own sin. He's trying to cover it up in his own heart. He doesn't want people to know. And this is not going well for him whatsoever. So we'll start with verse 32 and look at the misery of verse 3 of chapter 32, and look at the misery he's going through. When I kept silent about my sin, my body wasted away through my groaning all day long. For night and day your hand was heavy upon me. My vitality was drained away as with the fever heat of summer. So I think we have, on the first we have David's conscience bothering him. He knows that he's in sin. He knows he's doing wrong, but he's trying to justify it. You know how we do with sin we don't really want to turn from? This is what David seems to be doing, but his heart is heavy. He's wasting away. He's groaning all day long. Every time he thinks about this, he knows he was wrong, but he doesn't want to turn from this. And on top of that, verse 4, God's hand is on him. So the Lord himself is getting involved with this and bringing guilt into David's life, not only feelings of guilt, which is definitely here, but also the reality of guilt. David is wrong. He is sinning, and God is not going to let him off very easily with that. So his hand is on him. So then in verse 5, we find finally he confesses his sin. I acknowledged my sin to you, and my iniquity I did not hide. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. And so finally he gives in. This is about a year after the sin itself, apparently, according to the Old Testament narrative. And God does forgive him the guilt of his sin. Now, that doesn't mean all the consequences are gone, as we know. Unfortunately, David will pay a heavy price for what he has done, but God has forgiven him. The sins are gone, the guilt is gone, and we're so thankful the Lord gives us true forgiveness when we turn to him. And so he opens the psalm, as we back up to verse 1 and 2, with the rejoicing over the fact that he has been forgiven. How blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. How blessed is a man whom the Lord does not impute iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. And so he starts off by pointing out that he's now in a blessed situation. The Lord has forgiven him, and his sins are no longer held against him, even though now, as we've seen, he wasn't in that situation for some time. And then in the latter half of the psalm, there are two messages here. One is from David and one is from God. The first message is verses 6 and 7. David is speaking to his audience, to you and I. He says, therefore, let everyone who is godly pray to you in a time when you may be found. Speaking of God, surely in a flood of great waters they will not reach you. You are my hiding place. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with the songs of deliverance. And so he encourages his audience, and we are included in that, to turn to the Lord while he may be found. In the flood of many waters, we may not reach him. In other words, in the very heat of the battle, when we're engulfed with our own sinfulness and our all the emotions and so forth that go with that, we may find it very difficult to reach the Lord, even though he's there and he's ready to hear our confession. It's more difficult as we're in there in that hard time. So seek the Lord. And when we do, we find he's our hiding place, and he will preserve us from trouble. He will surround us with songs of deliverance. A beautiful picture here. The second message comes from God himself, as he says in verse 8, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. Do not be like a horse or the mule, which has no understanding, whose trappings include bit and bridle to hold them in check. Otherwise, they will not come to you. Don't be like those stubborn animals. Turn to the Lord now. Many are the sorrows of the wicked, but he who trusts in the Lord, loving kindness shall surround him. Be glad in the Lord and rejoice, you righteous one, and shout for joy, all you who are upright in heart. So the Lord calls us to turn to Him and find that His loving kindness and His forgiveness is there. Don't be a stubborn animal like a horse or a mule. Turn to Him, and you'll find that His loving kindness will surround us. A message from David and a corresponding message from God Himself. Good stuff. I hope this is helpful to you as you read Psalm 32 with us.